So another thing is, so when is your mid-sale?
20 to 25.
22. Today is 6. So we have was active objects. So anybody remembers, can anybody summarize me what an active object is? Forget about the slide, but what exactly is the new thing that is bringing? What is the new thing about active object that Symbian OS is pushing? What was wrong or what was different in the previous operating system? Not wrong, but and what is now corrected or modified for the Symbian OS? So I mentioned about a couple of things, two important things that you should remember, and these are the different things for active objects. So anybody remembers what are the two things?
Request field. Context switch.
Context switch,
don't
right.
have to remember multiple where.
Right.
Start process.
Right. So there is a single entry point. You don't have to remember, or the operating system doesn't have to remember when it switches. So what happens in the standard operating system is you can leave the program at any point in the instruction sequence and switch the context, go to another process, and when you come back to the first process again, operating system remembers where it had left off and it picks up from that point. Right? In Symbian OS, because of the active objects, the way they are implemented, one doesn't have to remember. Okay, that's first thing. Second thing, there is another optimization for mobile operating system. So quiet in the back. No talking, please. The second thing was, in the standard operating system, what happens is every process, when if there is a context switch and moves from the ready state to the wait state, what we say the ready state and wait state, when it goes to the wait state, let's say it's waiting for an event to happen. For example, it is writing some data to the hard disk and it goes to the wait state. When it comes back to the ready state, because of the time slicing algorithm, it might be the case that still it is waiting for that event to happen, that write to happen to the hard disk. So it has to then, what happens is it just loops there and then goes back. And this can happen multiple times and this will waste the CPU. So what Symbian OS has done is, when it puts the process onto the wait queue, it also remembers what is the event it is waiting for. So for example, it is waiting for the flash disk write. Then only when that event has occurred, then it will take this process again and put it into the wait queue. That is another. So that is a big disadvantage in Symbian OS, because the process then doesn't have to do idle looping. The processor is not wasted, but then the operating system has to remember a little more. It has to remember for every process what it is waiting for. So combining these two things, and what in Symbian OS, then it is called as an active object, because it's all object programming. Everything is implemented as an object, and since this is called an active because operating system is actively remembering something about the object and schedules it only when it is necessary. So with these two things, there is an optimization and the operating system is able to work out faster. So we saw that Symbian OS is a general purpose operating system for most of the purposes, but then it also has something called a real-time functionality. So anybody remembers real-time functionality? What is real-time and what are the two things in real-time? The two categories we mentioned in real-time. One was the soft and one was the hard. And what is the difference between soft and hard? So let's take an example of hard real-time scheduling. What do you want? Wants to finish before P2, then it will come before P2, and so on. So you can order when every process wants to finish, order them into increasing order and then finish them. In this case, it may not happen that P1 will finish in 2 minutes. It might take 3 minutes. But what the operating system will guarantee is P1 will finish before P2. And this is what Symbian OS guarantees also. If there is a phone call and you are accessing your email or GPRS, then operating system will guarantee that the phone call will be serviced before your internet. So it will cut down your internet access, stop the internet access, because there is, so if you are using GPRS channel, and we'll see all these things slowly when we talk about the wireless part. The GPRS and your phone call is sharing the same channel. Right? So when the phone call comes, it stops the GPRS internet access. It will service the phone call. So that is how it is soft real-time scheduling. Because the phone call is the P1 process, it gets service before P2, which is now the internet access. Okay? So it's static monotonic scheduling strategy. That means everything you organize with the shortest deadline first. Whoever has to be finished earlier will come before, and the next of the thing. And then within that, so if two processes have the same deadline or similar deadline, then within that you go by time slices. And this is the standard round robin scheduling. So let's say there are 10 processes with the same deadline. Right? So there is no greater than or lower than relation. Right? In that case, what happens is all these processes can be finished at the same time. And to do that, what the operating system will do is use a round robin scheduling within it. So there is a priority scheduling on top. So there are two levels of scheduling. So there are two levels, level 1 to level 2. Level 1 is priority, and priority is calculated as a function of your deadline. And second is time slice. Right? And then you go in this order. Process with that. So if you start predicting, I think this what we have done is partially an operating system process. Every time a process runs for some time period, it sees how much time it took. Right? And then it keeps on noting down this value. Every time this happens, and so eventually it will put some weighted average function to predict how much time a process will take for the next time. Right? So because what happens is, if you connect to google.com, depending upon your network congestion and so on, it might take more time for you to download data or less time. Right? So it will keep a history of all these time intervals, how much time it took last time, before that, before that, before that. And then it will take average of all of these values with more weightage given to the latest values. So it will now predict, okay, how much time it will take to download the data. And this is what it uses to decide the deadline. Okay, so now next we'll move to IPC. So what is IPC? What does IPC stand for?
Inter-process communication.
Inter-process communication. Anybody knows what is the standard way of doing IPC in the operating system that you have used?
Shared buffers.
Shared buffers, okay.
Message passing.
Anything else?
Message passing.
Okay. Anything else?
As message passing.
Message passing. Anything else? Queues. So IPC is inter-process communication. So there are two different processes individual and they communicate with each other. Anybody, anything else? Yes, yes. There is something called RPC. Remote procedure calls. I don't know whether we have used this. But these are standard ways of doing it. So shared buffer. What is shared buffer? What happens in the shared buffer is two processes, it's a P1 and P2, and they want to interchange data, exchange data. They will allocate some part of the memory. Right? It's a dynamic allocation of memory. So you have a pointer to that. You pass on that pointer to another process and also tell the operating system now that this memory buffer is mutually shared between two processes. If they don't do this, operating system will create a trap. So if P1 has a memory access, it's its own memory. If P2 tries to access it without this permission, there will be a segmentation fault or some kind of a fault, because the standard security model does not allow this, right? So a process has to explicitly tell the operating system that this will be shared between two processes. So that is one. What is, let's see everything. So socket, I think you all know, right? What is message passing? So message passing is very much similar to socket programming. Socket programming is also one type of message passing. So there are different ways of passing messages, and one way to do it through sockets, but there could be another way. Another way would be just to send an mail. Right? So you actually send a mail between processes. One process has an inbox, another process will send a mail to that process just like we send email, and the other process will look at its inbox and get back all the messages. Right. So this is socket programming, message passing. RPC, what is RPC? How does RPC work?
Program needs to access the functionality of some other procedure. I mean,
Right.
for the user, it looks like as if it has everything which it wants or which it needs, but actually in the background it makes a procedure call to the procedure functionality which it wants to access,
Right.
and then that function performs its whatever it wants to do and returns the value to the original function, and then
So we looked at something called dynamic linking, right? Dynamic linking and loading. We at our institute haven't offered the compiler course. Compiler and programming languages. So there is a whole big theory about what exactly happens. So I will not go into that detail about compilers, programming languages, but a little bit of that. So we know what is dynamic linking and loading, and I think we have already seen one example of stdio library. What happens? If we just extend this, so this was for one machine, one local machine, right? So this is for local machine. Everything is happening locally and it works that way. What happens if you do it remotely? So what's happening is, you write a piece of code, and this is, I think now is because of the internet and Facebook and APIs and Twitter and everything, this is now becoming more and more popular. What happens is, there are a lot of programming functions. For example, Google Maps. Right? There is a lot of code in Google Maps. You can actually put Delhi and all the point of interest, routes from going from, let's say, metro route from location A to location B. All of these things, or even the metro fare, right? All of this information is already there in some website. And you want to use all of that. But you don't have that code. Google will never release this code. It will keep it for itself. Okay? So how do you write your own code and still use those functions? What could be a way? APIs. So how will it work?
Web services kind of thing you have.
Right. So web services. But let's not go into jargon and find out how it is exactly done. But let's say the Google doesn't want to disclose the code. So it doesn't want to give you all the code and run it on your machine. So how would you still use those functions? Think about this part, dynamic linking and loading. You want to use that code. You want to compile your own code also. And your machine should be told that whenever I use that function, something would be actually used. So how would you design a solution now? If you are an operating system designer or a programming language designer for Google, how would you design it? What should be done?
We will be giving them as in a function name and the parameters they are required to, and we will be designing.
Right. So one way is to just pass a message. Right? You compose a message saying I want to call this function with this data parameters. Then you send those values as a message to Google. Google, let's say it's an email message. Look at that email, execute the function on their server, get back all the results and give you back an email, right? And you get that message. So this is how message passing will be used to communicate, right? Now, but there are a lot of inefficiencies in this. Right? First of all, you have to construct a message, send a message, and return, I mean all that HTTP protocol and everything is happening there. So another way, and the way this is done typically in RPC, is when you compile code, you get something called a stub. Has anybody used RPC? So anybody know what stub is? At least in theory, not in hands-on. Right. Right. So for example, let's say I have a function called Google Map, right? And Google returns me actual map of all my GPS coordinates. I have a bunch of GPS coordinates and I want to put them in the map in a JPG image, right? So let's say Google Map is my function and its parameters are location 1, location 2, dot dot dot. Right? This is my function. Now what happens is Google will release a library of code with all the stubs in it. So it just says Google Map function and that's it's empty. Doesn't contain anything, right? So it gives me a .h file, library file. If I go to the implementation level, I get all of these stubs. I put this stuff in my code and I compile it. Now what happens is compiler is happy. Compiler sees definition of all the codes and it can link it, right? So it is happy and I get a compiled code. Now the challenge is what happens when I execute it, right? Because I don't have the function or the actual code of Google Maps. So at runtime, when I call this function Google Map, what happens is it will be called here and there is a trap written here. Trap as in, so it catches this invocation. When it catches this invocation, there is a standard function for all the Google functions. It takes all these parameters, it sees what is the function called, it takes the name of that, it binds it in a message. Then it opens a socket to Google, send this message over the socket, Google will execute the code there using actual code of Google underscore map. Whatever the results are, it will in the same socket give you back the result. The results will come here and this function, this trap will return it to you and you get the results. So now what has happened is, on the local machine there was no execution of the real code. All the code that I execute actually goes to Google or whichever the company is, they execute it there and send me back the result. So this is what remote procedure calls. So that's why it is remote and procedure call, RPC. So this is how it is done. And this is transparent in the sense I don't know whether this is happening over the network or not. If I'm just looking at the program, I will never find out whether this is happening over the network. I will just assume that it's happening locally on the machine. Okay? So that is a very standard way of communication. A lot of the Java programs or Amazon services and so on will use these kind of functionality, RPC. Now coming back to OS. We saw in Symbian OS, everything is a server. Right? So you typically is not expected to contact the kernel directly and make a system call. So we had two types of calls. Anybody remembers the name? Of course, one is the system call, and that will be there. But what is the other call? There was something called executive call. Okay? So executive call is something that you go to the server, and if there is a need for actual system call, it will go to the system call and inside the kernel. So all the functionality is pushed as much as possible to the server. Now, because of the, by definition, since we are using the servers in this operating system, all our communication will be client-server. Right? And whenever we come to the client and server model, it is obvious that we'll use sockets. Because these two are two different processes, and you will pass on messages between these two processes, and the standard way of doing it is socket. Right? So it's all based on the socket. The paradigm is socket programming, and then it's a client server oriented. There is one client, one server. Server is continuously running, so the client will open a connection to the server and send a message, get back all the results again through a message, and it will execute that. A user level service is a server is an object that's wait for the connections with request and service testing. Since every process that's happening inside the Symbian OS is an object, the server is also an active object, so it is also waiting there. And as we just talked about in the previous slide about active objects, the server is not continuously running, as in it is not idling, right? Just like you keep the car in idle mode. You switch on the car and you don't drive it. So it is actually taking up the petrol, right? And it is wasting our petrol. Same thing could happen here, but because of the active objects, what's going to happen is server is running only when there is an event, and the event is connection from a client. Whenever the client actually wants to talk to a server, then only operating system will schedule this server, and the server will then service the request from the client, and then again it goes back to the idle. Idle as in it will go back to the wait mode, right? And operating system will not schedule it again and again and again if there is no client service. And these remote procedure calls are not used in Symbian OS. Anybody can think of a reason why. Even though we have two different processes, client and server, we could have used, right? On sockets, we could have just used RPC. But what is the reason of not using RPC? So what is that you think could be a problem for RPC in Symbian OS? Or in general? It takes time. Then what happens is, since there is all local machine, first of all, right? The simple thing is this is all local machine. So you know where the servers and clients are and what they expect. So you can just send a message using a socket. You don't need to have the over functionality or overhead of RPC, where something is remote, and whenever there is a remote, what happens is that there is a challenge of passing the data. Anybody knows what is the challenge in passing the data over network? This is the hint for you. Byte order, right? So you cannot assume that every machine running on the internet is Intel. Right? It could be Motorola, it could be AMD, it could be IBM, some processor, right? And every processor has its own architecture. And it could be big Indian, so the byte order could be one way, or the little Indian. So it could be the other way, right? And whenever you send data over network, now you don't realize what's happening. You just use client servers, you use TCP/IP, send the data. But what's happening inside TCP/IP is whatever data you send, it is converted into a format called a network byte. So the Internet Authority, or whoever has designed the TCP/IP protocol, they have decided on one format, right? It could be either big Indian or the little Indian, right? But there is a network byte order, and this is how you will send the data. So now if you use RPC, all the communication has to be ordered according to the network byte order, and that acts as an overhead. You get all the data packets, you have to rearrange all of them and send it in a different order. On the other side, you again convert it back to the local architecture of the machine. Yeah? So there is an overhead. If you are not going to do anything remote, if everything is on your own phone, client is also on the phone, server is also on your phone, why would you want to change the order?
But there are certain applications certain computations which are really heavy and need certain resources which are not present on phone. Then how will it be handled?
Right. So in Symbian OS, whatever things are needed from the local phone, you will not use RPC. You would still use the active objects, connect to client server socket and send the data. Now if you want to use Google, then this is actually going to the remote thing. But now this is outside the scope of operating system, right? Symbian operating system. And for that you get remote procedure libraries and so on. Right? So and that way, so if you are using a web service, then you would use whatever RPC or whatever is the IPC mechanism you need to follow to do that. But within the operating system, they have decided not to use anything which is RPC. So there is a difference when you write the code now. If you write your code only for your phone, right, within the phone, then you would use this, all of this. But if you write,
but we won't need RPC if I'm writing a code only for my phone.
Right. But there are operating systems which are network based, right? So Windows NT like operating system which actually don't really So the user don't really see a difference between what's happening locally and network-wise. Right? So it's a network operating system. And in that case, it could be all RPCs. So there are operating systems which are completely network-based. You don't even realize where your code is running, on which machine, which processor, and so on. And there it makes sense to use RPC from ground.
But if we are limiting our code to a particular phone, so I know what kind of encoding my phone is using.
Yes.
And the constraint that you said that in
Right.
case of messaging we
Yes.
don't know what kind
Yes.
of phone, and then we have to convert a lot of things. So again, why?
So that is you're actually saying the answer, right? Because of all of this that you mentioned, we really don't need anything removed, and that's why we don't use it anymore, and it makes sense, right? But this is in looking at generally in operating system as in general point of view. And there are operating systems which are network based, and for them it makes sense, right? But for this doesn't make sense, as you see. The reasons are all what you mentioned. So, is this part clear? Any questions about this? So next thing we said about memory management, right? Anybody remembers what is the big difference between Symbian memory management in Symbian OS and otherwise in the different operating systems?
No virtual memory.
There is no virtual memory, right? So it actually becomes really simple. So what is a virtual memory? Two types of virtual memory. So there are in general two types. One is paging. This is the standard one. And I will say, so let's see what paging is, but also what is another one, big one. How is your memory arranged?
Segmentation.
Segmentation. Anybody knows in a simple word, simple English, what is the difference between paging and segmentation? In simple English, or you can give me an example. I don't want technical details.
Segmentation is dividing the memory into some equal parts. Paging is like dividing it into pages, and then every page endlessly store it in a page.
Right. But segment could be one could be a small segment, one could be a big segment. Right? In paging it be all the pages are same. But yeah, so it's almost correct, but I mean if you want to remember this in simple English, so you know all the books, right? You know what a book is. What is the standard way of dividing the book? Chapters and pages, right? So this is like a chapter, and this is what a page is. Right now it will become very easy for you to remember. So you can take a book and divide everything into equal chunks of data, right? Standard uniform. And so everything becomes a page, right? And one page could be half empty or another page could be full. And that is how paging is done. So you can see the book very easily. Right? Another way of dividing this book is in terms of chapters. Right? What happens is now one chapter could be big, another chapter could be very small. But now the advantage of this is it's very easy to tell somebody, okay, go to page number 20 and read this fourth line. Right? You can directly go to page 20 and read it. If I tell somebody to go to a chapter, it becomes a little harder because one chapter could be big, another chapter could be small. He has to scan everything, right? But the advantage of this is now this is logical division. So segmentation is the logical division of your entire memory. And the way it is done in operating system, the logical is there is something called code that goes into one segment. There is data, right? There is stack. So you can actually separate out the code part from the data part from the stack part. And it's very easy now to protect that memory. Because you don't want to change the code. When the code is loaded into the memory, the standard architecture of computers doesn't allow you to change the code itself, right? So you can set a bit and say, okay, this is not changeable. But if it's in terms of paging, it becomes hard because one page could contain both data and code. Now you can't say, I will not modify this page, or this page modification is not allowed. So this is how, I mean, if you go to any interview, job interview, these will be the standard questions, and it will be very hard to solve, or it's easy to get confused. If you remember this in terms of a book, it will be very easy for you to remember. Now what happens in Symbian OS is all of this overhead, there is too much overhead. Anybody knows what is the overhead? Addressing. What happens in the addressing?
Just the address specific right now, but page you can directly use.
No. So I am talking about overhead for both of them, not just paging or segmentation.
Logical addresses are converted to physical addresses.
So every address processor sends out. So I have a 32-bit processor, a 32-bit address will come out of that processor. Now, operating system has to stop that address, look at the address, and convert that address into something else. So if the address is A1, it has to apply some function to this A1, and then there is something else, A1 dash, right? And this address actually goes to the memory, gets you the data, and so every address that comes out has to be converted. So you delay the performance. Right? So this is an overhead. We don't want this overhead to happen in the Symbian operating system. So what they decided is not to have any virtual memory. Now, what is the obvious thing that needs to be done if we don't need virtual memory? So let me give you a hint. So one thing in the standard operating system is, let's say our page is not there in the memory. What happens? Right, so my program is consisting of 10 pages. Right? So this is my entire code, and I divide it into pages. This is P1, this is P10. So I have 10 pages. What happens when I start the code? In the let's say Linux, in the RAM, right. So in Symbian, so what will happen is in the standard operating system, let's say my main function is here in P1, so it will load P1. It will keep executing. The moment it goes to this code, it says, okay, I need P2. And so operating system will load P2 somewhere, right? And the reason it has to do all of this is because it has limited memory, right? So it will only swap in the pages on demand. So this is called on-demand paging, right? And this is how it is done. In Symbian OS, we have the same address space, right? So what happens is operating system doesn't want to have this overhead of loading the pages dynamically because there is no concept of page. So operating system, what it will do is when you load your application, it will take the entire code of the application and into the memory. So at the first time there is an overhead because you have to load the entire program. Even if you don't use all of these instructions, you still put them in the RAM. But later on the program execution is fast, and now the advantage is you don't need to dynamically slap every instructions and load something into the memory. So program must, so this is the standard way of doing it, saying logical address and physical addresses and mapping it. But now what we have done is, take the entire program, load it at arbitrary location in the memory, that's fine, you can put it anywhere in the RAM, and then the entire program executes. So if you have used the smartphones, what happens is, when you start one application, it starts second application, that's fine. You go to the third application, and then now after third application, if you go back to the first application, you may find it that it's starting from scratch again. And the reason is the operating system has run out of memory when you went to the second program and third program, and it puts the entire first program back to the memory, to the flash disk. And when you go back to that again, it again reloads it. Right? So operating system, and that's the reason in the first version of operating system, there was no concept of even a background process. So if you start, so these are, let's say, your applications, A1 and A2, right, on your screen. So the moment if you start A1, you see the screen of A1, and then if you press the home button, and you start now A2 again, it terminates A1 completely. And there is no, I mean, it cannot go into the background, it cannot run anywhere, it just has to go out. Because A2's code will take the entire memory. And then again, if you press the home button, then if you press A1, A1 will start from scratch. Right? And this is, whole thing is because there is no virtual memory management, there is no paging, and there is no on-demand loading of code. Right? So because of all of that, what happens is, you have to load everything into the memory at the first instruction itself. So few details. So it's a 32-bit operating system. That means it can go all the way to 2^32, which makes it 4 GB. So a processor can access data up to 4 GB. After that, there is no data, right? But you typically don't have 4 GB RAM still, right? So what you need is limited memory and then swap it. So there is still a frame size because when you load the code, it is loaded frame by frame, and it is usually 4 kilobytes. So all your code will be in multiples of 4 kilobytes. But this is variable. In the sense, from different Symbian OS, it could change from one Symbian OS version to another. So let's look at the diagrams. I have a diagram that is easier to understand rather than text. So what happens is, in Symbian OS, it will take this address and then it will do the paging like this. So this is the page. So you know what is paging is, right? So I don't have to go into the detail. Every address will have a page number and offset. Right? You know all this. Right? So what happens in Symbian OS is there is two levels of this. So you first go to something called the page directory and then you go to the page number. So there is two levels of hierarchy in terms of paging. So first address part, you go to the page directory. Inside that you find out what is the starting of that page table. Then is the page table number, and then you actually go to the page and this is the inside memory. Right? So this is all how it is, the memory is organized, and then when you load a code, you just load the entire code and put it into the memory. This is all you have to remember. So next comes the file system. So what is the reason of having a file system? Anybody knows? What is the purpose of file system? But that is one way to interoperate. Right? How to, just like we said about network byte order. When you send data over the network, there should be an order so that the other architecture can understand it. Same thing happens here. So when you want to send data from one location to another location, there has to be a standard format, and that is what the file structure is. What is another thing about, what is another reasons for having file systems?
Organization of files, our file organization.
So one, yes, so within, for ourselves also, if you want to read the files and you want to organize this, so for example, all your email will go at one place and so on. So for standard logical hierarchy of data, that is another reason. And the third reason is, so the data has to be robust. So when you create a file, you say, okay, this is one file structure, I organize data in it, and then there are proper CRC checks and so on, so that you maintain the file in a robust manner, and also for the security reason. There are some files which are accessed only by you and not by others. There are some files which can be accessed by the groups of people and so on. For all of that, there is a file structure. And the standard way is to use, there is a FAT16 system which is typically used by Windows, and then they move to FAT32. If you are using network operating system like NT, Windows NT, there is NTFS, network file system. So just like RPC can go across the machines, NTFS files can go across the servers. So you don't really know whether this file is locally stored on your machine or it is taken from a remote server. So there are network file systems also. So Symbian OS has decided to use the simplest one, FAT16, is because it's the most interoperable. Right? So you can connect your phone to any computer and you can actually mount the disk on that machine. And so there is not much to be discussed in terms of the file system because it's the standard.
Why have you written that FAT32 supports a long files? It has a limit of 4 GB that file will be out 4 GB of size FAT32 does not.
Right. So FAT16 is 16-bit, FAT32 is 32-bit. So there is something called an allocation table in files. Right. So you maintain all the lists. There is something called, in Linux it's called inode. So every file has a unique identifier, just like on the memory and how much memory you can access. Right. So depending on that, you will have a table, index table. If you can access, if you have 32 bits, you can access far more data. And then your index table, the main directory, will also need to be huge. Right? So, if you want to have a shorter allocation table, you will use FAT61. Right? And because of that, then, of course, you can't have a very big file. Right? Because your size is limited. So that is the reason the choice of FAT16. Right? But as you move to bigger architectures and bigger files, you will need FAT32. But one thing is, so even though it natively supports FAT16, you can have support for complex like FAT32 and NTFS and so on by implementing the right server. You remember, this is all client-server based communication. There is a kernel which you don't change. Right? So kernel has its own structure of file and data, it will use it. But let's say you want to have NTFS on your phone. You just have to implement the server on top of the kernel, and that will give you access to the NTFS. Right? So it has to do a lot of computations internally, but then it can give you access. For example, implementation of NFS. NFS is also a network file system or Samba, assembly like structures. So you can have all of that in your phone if you implement the right servers. Let's take a break of 5 minutes. When you start an application, all of the code should be within the RAM. If you try to address an instruction which is not in the page, then it results in a trap or an error condition for Symbian operating system. In other operating systems, there will be a fault, which is typically called a page fault. Operating system goes to the hard disk, retrieves back another page, puts in the memory, and then you continue to execution. But in Symbian OS, that is not allowed. It's a trap, it's an error condition, and the application is terminated. Right? So it will have an unhandled exception error, and it will terminate that application if such a thing happens. So we cannot replace memory frames that are used with the pages coming from an incoming application. So once an application is loaded, you have to load everything. If you move to another application and you need those pages, you have to terminate that application, put all its frames back to the hard disk, and put another application's data or code into the memory. So that is how it is all simplified in terms of Symbian operators.
Symbian, there is no swapping, there is no virtual memory. This means that it cannot handle larger applications. And we have constraints.
Right. So another side effect of all of this is if the application requires a long code which cannot fit into the RAM entirely in one go, then you cannot have that application. Right? Because otherwise in the standard operating system, you can swap in, swap out, swap in, swap out and still work for that application. In Symbian OS, you have to put everything into the RAM at one time. If you can't put it, you cannot have that application. So application size is also limited.
Bad thing about it, I guess.
It's a bad thing, but you typically don't want a huge application that takes the entire RAM in this particular case. And that is fine. Because now your code is even bigger than the operating system, and you typically don't want code which is so huge that it's bigger than the operating system itself. Next, coming to the device level, we say all the device drivers typically in the operating system, they execute in a privilege mode because of the fact that they have to access the hardware, which is a privileged instruction. Not everybody can access the hardware directly. Right? So all the device drivers will execute in a privilege mode, and the user is entitled to go through this device driver to access the data. Symbian OS, we saw this part also, I think before, that every device driver has two components, or two parts. One is the logical device driver and another one is the physical device driver. And the reason for separation is because if you change from one hardware to another hardware, you don't want to rewrite your entire device driver. What you want is just rewrite the part of it which is the physical device driver, and then keep the logical part constant. So for example, hello, no talking. So if you have a sound card, which is 8-bit sound card, and then another computer has a 16-bit sound card, right? So it varies now. So what you need is a different physical device part, which communicates to the sound card. But the logical part is still the same. You will still open up a WAV file or MP3 file, take the data and send it, right? Depending upon which sound card, it will have different bits. But name of the files is still the same. And the advantage of this is now you can port the same Symbian operating system to different manufacturers' phones. Samsung, Nokia, Sony Ericsson and so on, and it becomes portable. So one example that they have given is a serial device. So all of the communication that happens through a serial port. So UART is the serial communication, right? It's a universal serial communication. All the serial devices. It's very simple. There is an RX line and there is a TX line, right? And all the communication, all the processors support this, right? And you can have a modem that is talking this. You can have your flash disk talking this, and it could be multiple. For example, your GPS could be UART based. Your GPS could be UART based, and then your infrared could be UART based. Right? If you have an infrared remote, a communication channel, and that also can talk a serial communication protocol. So UART is a protocol. So what you would do is you would put UART protocol into a different logical thing, which is like this, and the actual GPS wire or the infrared, which is totally wireless, you would put in the physical case. Right? And now you can combine like this. So you can replace the actual bottom part with whatever you want: GPS communication, USB communication, IR communication, serial printer communication, and so on. But your UART protocol is constant. And the same thing can be done even for the communication. So you use the standard TCP/IP, but underneath you can have Wi-Fi, or you can have GPRS, or you can have Bluetooth, right? So you can access internet through different methods, like this. But your TCP/IP protocol, which is constant, will be running on the top. Look at the whole structure of operating system. It will look something similar to this. So this is all hardware, this is your actual devices, and this is software. So this is your device driver in the operating system, physical, logical, and then you can implement protocols like this on top. Right? So some part of it is there in logical also, but some parts actually can be taken away and put it in this context, like TCP/IP, and then you can have the applications running here in user. So we'll see all this in detail in the next slide. So the physical part is mostly focused on efficient and correct hardware communication. So you can do all the CRC checks and make sure that all the bit transfer is correct. And then this is mostly to maximize performance. So like UART protocol, where you will send, you packet the, you will take the data, serial data, put it in packets and then send it. So IR port and RS-232 ports, that is another type of the port. They are all serial devices, and they can use the same generic serial element. So whenever you have a serial communications happening, over wire or wireless, you can use the same general logical device type. But at the bottom it could be different, right? It could be actual wire or wireless. So this is how you would divide and make your device driver portable. So other type of things that we saw in the big diagram, one is CSY module. So it communicates directly with PDD, and one example of this is the protocol required to do raw transfer to the hard disk. So this is actually putting the buffers in the memory, and then you can put 7 bits or 8 bits of data at a time, and that will communicate. Then there is a telephony server, which is implementing the actual telephone call. So whenever you make a phone call and you dial up the number, the international calling, you press the plus and so on, or you put 0 and you press the number. So all of that telephone functionality will go into this module. So this is again separated into another module. And if you access internet through this, you can even do that. So you know all, have you heard of a term called modem? Have you used modem? I don't know. So in the old days, all the internet access was through modem. You take the telephone line, you connect it to a modem, and then you dial a number, actual number. And after that, you use the same telephone line, and you will then send the data, not voice, but the data. So every 1 and 0 will be encoded as a voice, and it will go over the voice. Right? So, and if you pick up this phone, at that time you can actually hear the sound of 0 and 1s. Right? So that was not an efficient way of doing it, but that was the most simple way to do data transfer over telephone line. The same thing can be used with TSI module. So this can make a phone call and then send voice data. So if you are accessing internet through this as your phone as a modem, then you can combine the TCP/IP protocol module and the TSY module underneath, and then use it for internet data transfer. Right? This is the PRT module that I was talking about, which implements, let's say, TCP/IP. So you have a combination of PRT and TSY, and you can access internet over your audio phone call. Then there is something called MTMs, which is the message handling. There are so many messages on your phone. There is SMS message, there is Facebook message, this message, email, and so on. So all of this thing is happening through message modules, MTMs. Depending upon which client you have installed to access your internet, they will all use the same modules to access. So for example, if you are using IMAP, what is another protocol? So you can access emails to different protocols like this. Right? So if you use a different PRT module, but the message that you see is still the same one, it's email. It has from address, to address, subject, and the data and attachments. Right? So it's all the same. So you can encode the way to send and receive messages into MTM, and then you can encode IMAP and POP3 into PRT modules. You combine these two and you get the internet access. Right? So you combine TCP/IP, then let's say POP3, and then the TSY module, and then after this you will get the entire email system running on your phone. Now the advantage of this is every email client is not implementing all of this separately, right? They just combine, and now they have to just design the UI. So for example, if you have a Gmail client running on your phone, it just has to implement UI and use all of these 3 modules, combine them, and you get the emails. So that is an advantage of dividing it into different modules. The same thing has been discussed here. So initially the standard way of accessing the internet on your phone was WAP. Anybody knows what? Have you used WAP? It's almost outdated now. Nobody uses WAP. So what they designed is, it actually uses the TSY module of GSM. So the modem part I was talking about. Like, so for example, every website like Times of India will have 2 versions. One is the standard timesofindia.com and one is the WAP version. So we decided to have another version of the whole website, and it was running on the WAP protocol. Right? And so it has its own markup language also. Right? So you can use the same markup language as HTML. And now that was not scaling up, because I was asking every company, the system was asking every company to have 2 different websites. And that's not scalable. And because of that, finally they decided to do away with WAP stack protocol. They say, okay, let's not do WAP, so now there is just only one internet. We don't have two different internets running. One is the mobile and one is the PC internet. We don't have that. We just have the PC internet, and phone is adapted to use the TCP/IP and HTML protocol to access that internet. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been such a scalable or favorable approach to have two different kinds of internet. But by the way, so the reason of discussing WAP was, even that was combination of different modules. It was a combination of GSM, PSY module, and top of that the SMS and so on. So you combine all of that and you get the WAP interface. So this is an advantage of combining modules. And the final part was, I talked about, was messages. Like we have SMS, email, we have fax now, but there are different kinds of messages, like VCAR. Right? So you can send a contact of one person using a phone. Right? And some phones do support it. So you can just send a VCard to another person, and that VCard will be imported inside the phone book on the other phone. So that's possible. But all of these are types of messages. They communicate using the standard TCP/IP protocol or SMS protocol. You can send a VCard using SMS. Right? And so the right applications needs to be installed on the phone to retrieve your SMS. Look at that and you see, okay, it's a VCard. So you will put the VCard module and import it into your address book. If you look at these MTM's modules, you can see them in 4 classes. One is the UI, the user interface, the data, for example, the icons and so on. Then there is a client side and there is a server side. Because everything is a client and server. So you will have a client type MTM, and then on the server side there is an MTM. And then all of this can be done using any of these protocols and any of the communication channels. So I can even send over Wi-Fi. If I want to send a VCard over Wi-Fi, I can do that. I just need a module to access Wi-Fi and a module to access the VCard. Combine them and I can do that. So this is how the operating system is, very plug and play. And you can do lots of more things than just possible to look at. This is where we stop at Symbian OS. So this is the end of Symbian OS. Next class I will talk a little bit about Android. So some of you are doing courses in Android, and we'll see what is the difference between this and Android. Most of things are same and I will not talk about them, but the different things I will talk about.